Stop whatever you're doing. Before your MMR turns into another Fall Out Boy song, listen to this video. If you're not where you want to be in your rank, more so than anything else, it is probably because you are too stuck in your own head that you believe that everything that you're doing is right, or that the majority of the things that you're doing incorrectly are actually in your brain correct. And so you're convincing yourself, you're gaslighting yourself into thinking that you're playing better than you really are.
I have done nothing wrong ever in my life.
I know this. And I love you.
I love you too, Daddy. Money, please! My money.
And that is totally fine. I do it too. I just think it's important that we have a bit of a real one, a real talk, if you will, a bit of a heart to heart, you know, between me and you, man to man, ego to ego, about why our egos are holding us back in this little computer game that we call Dota. And who knows, you know, I think this can apply to any domain of life. So if you want to go ahead and existentialize this subject out to your other avenues, maybe you're playing League, maybe you're playing, I don't know, something else entirely, go ahead. Consider this just a bit of a philosophical musing. So basically, I've compiled 3 major reasons, and I want to go over them with example, starting with the first. Your ego holds you back from your ability to correctly assess your opponents. Your ops are coming at you with weaponry and technology that you've never heard of, and that is absolutely true in any game. This is especially true for older games. You guys know what I'm talking about with League and Dota, where the metas have been thoroughly established. You know, they change season to season, but players are just getting better, only getting better over time, over a long period of time, mind you. But yeah, the game's evolving, and you have to, these days, just expect that whoever you're playing against, even if they're a complete quote-unquote noob, or if they're like the lowest rank in any game that you're playing, Herald or Bronze in League, or I don't know, whatever the ranks are in like CSGO or any shooter, you just have to expect that the people that you're playing against, even in the lowest rank, probably have some concept of what they're playing. Especially if you're at that rank, okay? I don't want to lose the plot too much. If you're at that rank and you're trying to climb, quit underestimating your opponents. Put your ego to the side and assume that the next time they're trying to set up what you would consider an obvious play on you, just keep in mind that you don't have all the information figured out. You probably don't see Fog of War unless you're playing a game like chess. And more importantly than that, they probably know something that you don't, okay? They're literally a 5-stack if you're playing most MOBAs these days. They're probably in some form of communication with themselves that you aren't a part of and know something about a play that you don't. And especially if they're trying to make it on you, and especially if you've been feeding with this like stupid identity spiral that most of us get into. When you underestimate your opponents, you often find yourself in this thought pattern of thinking that because your opponents are bad, that you should be able to beat them. And anytime you're not beating them, it's because you're even worse than them. And then you start focusing on how bad you and your allies are. You start asking like, God, why are we so bad? And it's just this vicious thought spiral where you just end up hating the world, and at least the world of whatever competitive game you're playing. And I just wish it would go away, because I truly don't even think it's productive for the people themselves to get into. There is one thing with being able to take responsibility in your own play. That's literally the opposite of having an ego. And then there's another thing of thinking that everybody is shit and that you're also shit just because you're not able to beat everybody else that's around you. Okay, that is definitely not responsibility or taking it. That is the epitome of ego, and it needs to die. The second reason why your ego is holding you back in Dota or any competitive venture is because it makes you impossible to be on a team with. This one is pretty clear cut and dry. Humans are social creatures. To perform at a high level in most ventures, and that's certainly true for competitive gaming, Dota, League, you need to be able to be on a team. You need to be able to be worked with. You need to be able to see yourself in other people's shoes, and especially recognize when you become overbearing, too much, too talkative. Having a big ego clouds your ability to see this in other people, and it makes them naturally gravitate away from you. The worst part, the saddest part about this is that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Having a big ego often means you put up a lot of walls and defense mechanisms, making you less prone to hearing this very vital piece of criticism that you need to hear, which is you got to drop the ego. Otherwise, nobody's going to want to work with you. The third reason why your ego is holding you back is probably the first reason you expected to hear. And it is pretty obvious, I'll give you that. It is that you just genuinely cannot criticize your own misplays, and it causes you to stagnate. This happens especially in your macro before it happens in your micro, but it happens in both, I assure you. What happens when your ego is too big is you start to think in terms of frameworks that are unchanging and immovable. And this leads you to believing that anything in life can be generalized, when in actuality, if living has taught any of us anything, it is that generalizations are generally to be stayed away from outside of like strict laws of reality. This means that when it comes to things as fluid as playing video games, there is no and should never be some considered hard and fast rule set for things. But when you have a big ego, when you think that you have everything figured out, you start to think in those terms. You start to think in extreme generalities. I'll bring up the increased importance on refilling your mids bottle over the last 5 years of competitive Dota, and the creep pulling shenanigans that was happening in the safe lane or off lane of like 3 years ago as my prime examples to show that nobody really has this game figured out, not even the pros. We're all just developing technology in real time and copying tech from other people while we're at it. Mostly that's what's happening, actually. Most of us are just like 95% of people that play 95% of online games are actually just copying technology from other players in pretty much every facet of it. We're copying their hero picks, we're copying their builds, we're copying their play styles, and we're getting it from a wide variety of inputs, and we're culminating all of that opinion, all of our information that we can gather into our own singular output, which makes us our own individual unique player, which is special and magical in its own way. But it's important to recognize that while you're producing your own special gameplay, you are just synthesizing information you have heard. And so there is absolutely no reason to think at any given moment that you have everything figured out.
TP to the tier 2 and we killed the Lich. That was really lucky because Lena was right there.
All you have is a synthesized perspective based on an amalgamation of media that you've consumed on how to play whatever competitive game you're playing. That's all you ever have at any moment in time when you're talking about playing competitive games. You do not have the singular Bible, the quintessential way to do it, even if all you're ever doing is looking at pro replays. You just have a perspective on the game that matches one that has watched a lot of pro replays. When you have a big ego, when you think that you have everything figured out, you start to think in those terms. You start to think in extreme generalities, and you shut things down before you give them the opportunity to even blossom.